Hello, good morning. Welcome to this new training session within the Academy Week. Today we have with us Elizabeth Smith, CEO from ICONS, and Angelique Lussuan. They both represent the FedFex project in the Fed area, Future and Emerging Technologies. Welcome, Elizabeth, Angelique. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I just leave the stage to you. It's yours.
Okay, so thank you again, Eva, for inviting us to speak in your academy. So I'm Angelique, and my colleague here with me is Elizabeth, and we're going to talk about the crucial aspects you might want to remember when you communicate and disseminate your research to reach out to your audiences and also create the resonate impacts of your research. So let me just Okay, so this is us. I'm a manager, communication manager in ICONS, and also one of the people in charge of handling FedFX. As well with me is Elizabeth Schmid, so she's director of our department in ICONS, and also she used to be the coordinator of EFFECT, a project that was the forerunner of FedFX. So here we're going to just give you a short introduction about FedFX. FedFX is a FET Open CSA project focused on communication and outreach on FET itself. Now, we started last year on January and we'll be finishing next year, of course, by the end of June. Now, together with ICONS are also APRE, who is the coordinator of FedFX, Zabala, and El Tema. So what we do here in FedFX is that we try to communicate about the FET ecosystem and also the EIC, in particular the EIC Pathfinder. So what we do is that we want to enhance the visibility and the impact of FET research in general to a variety of actors. This includes the researchers, the policymakers, the investors, and also the general public. We do that by launching a set of public communication activities and also produce a variety of tools and media formats. While we communicate, we also try to engage with both FET and EIC stakeholders by encouraging people to enter in a debate about the said themes, and also to collaborate with other multiple stakeholders through a series of activities focused on community building and engagement. And that could be done through a series of workshops that we've had with policymakers, also launching a series of events and initiatives like the Journalists in the Lab, the Future Tech Week, the FedFX Bills, the webinars, and so on. Now, of course, a short introduction of what we do. One of the main activities that we have in FedFX is our communication hub. So if you visit fedfx.eu, which was domain that was awarded back in 2019 for the EU Web Awards, now you can see a lot of our stories that we feature on the FET projects that we've selected or we've documented, as well as about the ecosystem itself and the people behind FET, and also produce news about the EIC Pathfinder in general. Also in the website, you can check out all the FET projects via our project database, and also visit and look at the resources that we've included on FET and EIC Pathfinder in general through our Knowledge Hub. Now, time and time again, of course, we would like to ask help from you guys, the FET researchers. So we're always open for you to submit your FedFX editorials. So talking like, you know, the news that you have on your results and your new findings. We'd love to hear from you guys. So it's best that you send your contribution to info@fedfx.eu, and we'll respond to you accordingly to help you out produce the news that we will also publish in our website. And this news, of course, will be sent out in our bi-monthly newsletter. Now, some of the activities that we've had this year is, of course, the Future Tech Week, which happened some weeks ago, and this was used to showcase the different voices or results from the EIC Pathfinder and FET projects. So we wanted to let people be more aware of the FET legacy. to the EIC Pathfinder. Now, there were so many participants in this event, in particular, the PHET research projects, of course, produce a series of videos and creative products in the process. And also, at the end of it all, the innovators and fellow researchers and policymakers were able to see the results themselves. Another thing that we did this year is to publish the booklet on the 30 years legacy of PHET, which is called Voices from the Future. So in it, you can see a lot of our curated stories, which we've selected from the publications we had for the past years. And also we've included exclusive interviews of different key PHET people who have been involved from the very beginning and talk about PHET's legacy. Now, PHET-FX, of course, is not the only CSA project in the PHET ecosystem. We have also, of course, PREFET, who's hosting this comprehensive webinar, comprehensive academy, and as well together with us is PHET Briefing, which looks more about focuses more about the innovation. And as well together with us is Access for SMEs, where the national contact points join together to provide you services for if a PHET research wants to proceed towards exploiting the results. Now, let's start with the webinar. So what we said is that we wanted to tell you more about how to communicate and disseminate your research to widen the impact of the research, as I said. So why do we want to communicate our high-tech disruptive research, which in short is PHET? Science and society have always had an ongoing struggle. So scientists have always thought that that people outside their bubble are not able to comprehend their results or try to give misleading information of what they do, while society thinks that scientists are too far-fetched from reality and they don't know what's going on in their heads. So what we need to do is that we need to bridge the gap between science and society, and that could be done through communication. By communicating, we are able to nurture this ecosystem in science, where you don't only have the scientists on board, you also have the general public, the policymakers, the investors, and so on. All these people combined can nurture the science ecosystem. So by communicating, we can let society be aware of your research and its impact, as well allow them to align with you guys to create coherent line of actions during a crisis, as you can see with COVID. And as well, by communicating, we are able to debunk the fake news and misinformation. But of course, there are so many reasons why you need to communicate your science. Now, with future and emerging technologies, we have far-fetched types of research, and that could be broken down into the different themes that you see here. So we have artificial intelligence and IT, biotech and health enhancement, culture and societal change, energy and environment engineering, and as well nanotech and new materials. So all these are too futuristic, and the challenge here is that you need to communicate this type of research to society. But how do we do that? Of course, we first want to take a step back and see that this address this challenge, which is very overwhelming in this approach, where as you can see here, this is a village. Picture yourselves in a village and ask yourself, how am I going to communicate to the different people in this village in a short or limited span of time? Doing so, you need to build a roadmap. By building a roadmap, you'll be able to effectively gain a wide number of audience who could understand about your research and know the impacts that it provides. Now, that's why we want to talk about the CDE plan. What is the CDE plan? So CDE means communications, disseminations, and exploitation. Communications, we talk about your project. We tell them what you do. while disseminations, we also talk about the results, not only the key principles of your project. And later on with exploitation, we make these results available for use. But of course, for this webinar, we'll only focus these two approaches, communications and disseminations. These two are actually two peas in a pod, so they go by tandem. Communication cannot be done. Communication can be done, but become more effective with dissemination, while dissemination cannot be done without communication. So the tools that you need to focus when you look at communication are the following. You have the newsletter, the press releases, project flyers and brochures, social media where you publish blogs, use social media accounts, and also do communication campaigns. Now with the dissemination, the typical products that you need to look at are by showcasing, of course, the results through a dedicated page in your project website, producing videos that people can share, scientific publications, of course, that you can share. Then there are also articles in magazines where journalists could approach you to produce this stuff. There are also fact sheets, policy briefs, exhibitions, and also conference presentation. Now, all these goes to show that we need to invest in science communication. Being a scientist myself back then, I was able to see that there's this need for us to communicate the science, because without it, people wouldn't even know what we do, and in turn will not be able to invest their time and money to nurture our ecosystem. So without communication, we cannot do so much science. And by communicating, we could create impacts that could resonate in society, let them be engaged and accept what's going on in science. And by communicating, we will be able to easily reach out to investors and policymakers and thus be able to fund our research. And that's why there are the PREFET projects. Now, I'll leave the floor to my colleague Elizabeth, who will be talking more about planning our communication dissemination activities.
Thank you very much, Angelique, for this introduction. Of course, it's all the important messages to you. Maybe you're already familiar, of course, with the differences between communication and dissemination, as well as exploitation. But of course, it's always important to remind this, because it's actually feeding into the next steps of our training. So now we'd like to get deeper into the more operative aspects on how to develop an effective and impactful communication and dissemination strategy, that is to say the roadmap Angelique was referring to before in her slide. Next one, Angelique, thank you. Next slide, thank you. Thank you. So basically, first message is that communication and dissemination activities must be strategically planned over time. So we all are aware of the fact that ad hoc efforts are not effective, while of course having in mind a sound dissemination and communication strategy translated into a communication and dissemination plan, which is actually a sort of action plan of all the activities, the objectives, the people you want to reach out, is actually a baseline in order to be successful in communicating. And of course, having this in mind, you will be more effective. Of course, you will actually be able to really create impacts, as we said before, on society, which is necessary, where communication and dissemination are absolutely the requirements to do so. And above all, you will also be able to carefully manage also your communication budget, so the efforts that you are investing in communication. This is possible thanks, of course, to another important part of the overall process, which is represented by the tracking and monitoring of your communication and dissemination activities. So never forget that from day one, when you will start communicating about your project, this is also very important to see how your strategy is performing. And you can do this by using, of course, some indicators, some monitoring activities, which will tell you how effective and you are in terms of communicating, and of course provide you the guidelines on how you can improve your communication, or give you the signals of where your communication is not performing so well and you may need some corrective measures. So think of the process in these 3 steps, which are somehow compensating each other. And think, act, and plan strategically is a fundamental idea that you have to put in your minds. So thanks. So the next slide. Thank you. So we have actually a first question for you. So we have quite a few participants on board. So I invite you to answer to this first question. Have you ever made your own communication and dissemination plan? So we're giving you just some minutes so you can actually answer one of the 3 answers just by ticking the box. So yes, I wrote the whole communication plan. Yes, but I contributed partially, or not at all. Yes, great. I think that yes, from our poll, we can see that 50% of the participants in this room are already aware of how to write a communication and dissemination plan. So we have some experts now. The figures are slightly changing, so it's 40%, where another 40% have actually contributed to the production of this plan. While so far, okay, let's see. Okay, we can close in a few seconds. So yes. Thank you. We can close the poll now. Yes, so we have now the right figures. Yes, so actually, yes, 30% so wrote the complete communication and dissemination plan, 50% contributed partially, and 17% not had any experience with this. So I'm happy, but of course the majority has already some knowledge on how to develop a plan. And for those, of course, who have not had the experience, let's now look into the fundamentals of how to produce a communication and dissemination plan and how to implement it. Sorry, Angelique, I cannot see the presentation anymore. If you can share it. I still cannot see the presentation, Angelique. I don't know if there are some problems. Oh, here we are. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, but which are actually the key ingredients in order to set up a communication and dissemination plan? This is actually the way we are approaching the definition of our strategy, and of course, as we said, the translation of this strategy into a plan. So we mainly answer to these, I would say, 6-7 main questions. Which are actually the why, so identifying why we are communicating, or what do we want to achieve with our communication and dissemination objectives. So very simple. Most important step is to identify the target, so who. The what is actually referred to the contents, so developing the key messages which are at the baseline of our future communications. The how, so actually which are the tools and channels, so the methods that we're going to use in our research communication activities or in our project. The when, so the timing and planning of our activities, and the where, so the actually coverage of our communication and dissemination activities. So actually this is another important point, because many of us are working probably in European funded projects, so with specific European and international collaboration focus. So basically the idea is actually to communicate at European level and even beyond, so at international level, but do also think of the importance of communicating locally. You may want to communicate locally because, of course, there are some important stakeholders there within your neighborhood, as we've seen also from the picture that Angelique showed you. So, and leverage, of course, on the communities that are closer to you, also at local level. So in a sort of bottom-up approach where you start from the local level, and of course you spread, of course, your communication at a broader level, geographical level. And of course, also do not forget that in many cases you work with other partners, with other researchers, with other stakeholders within your project or within your research activities. And so do not forget to involve them in your communication and dissemination activities. So join forces together with your partners, so with their communication channels, methods, and communities, and this will enable you, of course, to reach out to broader audiences and, of course, achieve more impacts on society. The next one, Angelique, thank you. Okay, so let's get deeper into the some of the main questions that you want to answer. First of all, I would like to give you a framework of why we are actually communicating and disseminating, and especially think of the impacts we may reach and we may obtain by implementing a sound communication and dissemination strategy. So basically, free communication, the definition of which has been given before by Angelique, we really want to increase understanding of our research. We want to increase awareness, and this is actually a fundamental requirement in order to start involving our stakeholders and start involving the broader public, so engage also with the multiple audiences. Dissemination is about, as we've seen, communicating about the results. And in this case, we are going to be more specific in reaching out to our target audiences. This means that we will have to communicate with them by translating the contents of our research according to their specific expectations and needs and values. So it will be a more targeted communication approach, which will be triggering another very important impact, which is actually social acceptance. So without the acceptance, it won't be possible also to facilitate the way towards the exploitation of our results, that is to say, the uptake, replication, or sustainability in general of our results. So these are actually the main objectives of our communication plan. Of course, in a wider perspective, you will have then to dig deeper into the specific focus of your research, of your project, and of course, define which are the most punctual objectives that you want to reach out through the implementation of your strategy. The next slide, thank you. Yes, I'm now focusing a little bit also on the timing because this is very much related to the impacts we want to achieve. So when is the best time to start? And the answer is, I would say, from day one of your project, of your research activity. We are aware of the fact that at the beginning you won't have so many contents to communicate, but I would say yes and no. We won't have the results to communicate, but you have lots of contents to talk about, which are actually related to your research activities. So you can start explaining what your project or research activity is about, highlight the contribution to societal challenges that you want to meet. You actually always to put yourself in a broader picture, in the bigger picture, so in an external context and ecosystem. So your research, beyond, of course, the peers you're working with, has to have actually impacts on society also, because most of the time it's a public funded research. So we really wanted to maximize, of course, our public spending as well. And during the project, of course, you will communicate about the progress of your research, your milestones and achievements. And of course, the most intensive phase of the communication activities will be for sure the end of the project. And I would say also beyond the end of the project, when, of course, your results are almost there or are there, and you really have the contents upon which you can set up a very effective dialogue with your stakeholders and with the beneficiaries of your research. Next slide, please. Thank you. As we said before, I would say that anyway, one of the preliminary and most important activity that you will have to perform when designing the strategy is actually to identify your targets. So who do we want to talk to? So ideally, our ambition is to reach out as many people and audiences as possible. But at the same time, we need to be realistic, so we cannot reach really everyone. So for sure, we have to have in mind that we want to reach out to the general public, and Angelique will explain later on how to do this. At the same time, as we have already said, it is very important to map, to identify and to select those target groups that are really fundamental in order to maximize your research impacts, and this means to deliver these results as they are going to be the beneficiaries, but also those enablers that will actually give you the possibility to exploit your results, to bring your results actually into a sort of exploitation strategy into the market, or in generating new knowledge that is then, of course, used by other researchers and so on. So actually what we did, for example, in PhET-FX is to produce real profiles, so the so-called personas. So in our project, for example, we identified the 4 main target groups represented by the scientists, because actually our platform, the PhET-FX communication hub, is also addressed to them. We wanted to reach out to the general public. We wanted to reach out to investors as well as to policymakers. So we have profiled these target audiences with a face, as you can see, with a name, but also with a few sentences, short sentences, which are actually expressing what their needs and expectations are about. Of course, this is a more complex way to identify the target audiences, because also we had to perform some interviews with these stakeholders in order to better understand how actually to design our strategy, and above all also the PhET-FX communication platform. Of course, we are not pretending that all the researchers and the projects are going to do in this way, but of course this is actually a possibility on how to better identify your targets. Next slide, Angelique, thank you. So basic ideas on how to identify your targets: diversify and specify your targets as much as possible. So also map them according to the level of engagement you want to have with these people, with these stakeholders. Geolocalize them, as we've said before, very important also to think about this. And of course, the type of stakeholders, which can be broader or of course restricted to specific identification of the sectors they are working in and so on. Take into account, of course, also the timing of the projects and the results in order to understand when is the best time to approach them. Ideally, from our point of view, and generally speaking, we should start again from day one, also to let them know about your project. But of course, in the course of a project, there are some specific steps where it is more needed to get in touch with specific stakeholders, especially, I'm especially referring to the dissemination phase of your project. And of course, again, use the consortium resources. So the other partners, the other researchers you're working with may have also their own communities, they have maybe their own expertise in order to broaden the map of these stakeholders and target audiences. The next slide, please. Thank you. So another important question, so third in the row, but still very important. After we have identified our target audiences, we also have to start thinking of the contents we wanted to share with them. So basically, the first step, of course, is not to have the broad encyclopedia of our research being transferred to our audiences. And for the scope of a communication and dissemination plan, we have to think of the key messages. Okay, we're all aware about the fact that contents are at the core of our communication. So without contents, it would be quite hard actually to communicate something to our audiences. And we also are aware of the fact that contents originate from the activities of the project and from its results. But next slide, thank you, Angelique. So at the very beginning, what the exercise that we have to do in in defining our communication and dissemination plan is to develop some key messages. So messages that people or our stakeholders will remember. And being key messages, they need to be simple and concise. These messages will be fundamental to draw your target's attention, of course. They might be and should be inspired by your research objectives and expectations. And they also are going to be developed according to your targets, because of course we will have two different levels of key messages, as we'll see later on. So actually they should also be tailored to your targets and therefore be also specific. Next slide, please. Okay, as I said, okay, we're going to have these two levels of key messages being defined in the communication and dissemination plan. So the broad the key messages which are valid for your project as a whole to address the broader public. So identify those key messages that are valid for the project and the general public, broadly speaking, based of course on your objectives, on your expectation and possible impacts and challenges that you're going to meet through your project. And a second level of key messages which are actually tailored according to your audiences. So identify those key messages that are useful for the target that you have identified in the first step, that is to say the who, the identification of your target audiences. So understand their expectations and needs, underline the benefits from the different perspectives. Next slide, thank you. So actually we are aware of the fact that not all the key messages will be suitable, of course, for any occasion and channel, but think of the fact that key messages might be very useful for you, for example, in starting the first communication activities, when you have to produce your first communication materials that need, for example, a payoff, or in case you need to find out some interesting statements or quotes when you are delivering, for example, an interview, when an interview may be with a journalist, of course, where you have to reach out, thinking, of course, of the broader public, but also of your stakeholders. You may use these key messages also in social media. We'll see later on how you can use them, for example, in producing some cards, some short videos with these key messages. And of course, they can be used as a baseline in order to produce more articulated news items. So how to create these key messages? First of all, identify the most relevant keywords of the project or of your research, of course. Rework the objectives and keywords in simple and clear messages. Produce statements for both for the general public and for each target audiences. And of course, let's always think that this exercise is not going to downsize, of course, the value and the excellence of your research. We do not want to trivialize, of course, the messages and, of course, the value of your research. But of course, we have to make this additional step in order to try to simplify actually the language we want to use in order to make our communication more accessible and inclusive as possible for many audiences. So now about the tools and channels is actually our, I think it's the fourth question we have to answer. So the how, which tools and channels shall we use in order to reach our target audiences? So plan to use a variety of methods, that is to say tools and channels, communication tools and channels for communicating and engaging with multiple stakeholders as well as with the public at large. Next slide, thank you. And to do so, our suggestion is, of course, to try to mix up your methods. So each target can be approached through a mix of methods, so communication channels and tools. Each method can be more or less effective, of course, for a given target. We must, of course, think of the tools and channels that our targets are using. Not everybody is used, for example, to use the social media, for example. In that case, if we know that our targets are not using this channel, I will start, of course, with those channels and tools that they are more familiar with, and maybe as trust and reputation in you is increasing, and maybe they're also increasing their communication skills using other tools, you may also propose more innovative methods. Next slide, thank you. So the exercise in this case, when answering the how question, is actually to map your targets and the tools and channels together. So which channels are facilitating our objectives? Which channels are used by our targets? Which channels are in line with the topics of our project? So really make an inventory of the communication tools and channels that you can use. Of course, we're not only talking about brand new communication channels and tools. I'm referring, for example, to a project. Of course, the project will have a website, probably social media and new communication tools, but also try to maximize and to exploit the already existing communication channels that are used, for example, by your partners. So you already have communication channels within your organizations and universities, Also try to exploit these channels as a first start. And then, of course, while, again, the visibility of your project and research is increasing, maximize, of course, also your efforts on your project and research channels. So this is just, again, another suggestion to always try to look outside the small group of people you're working with, and try to exploit both the existing channels, internal within your consortium, but also the external channels. And I'm referring, of course, to the many platforms, for example, communication platforms that are already existing and that are also provided, for example, by the European Commission itself, that are, of course, giving you a lot of visibility and the way, of course, to interact with our channels, and above all, to reach out as many people as possible. So the next slide. Actually, when you will start, of course, with communicating and choosing the right methods to communicate with your targets, be aware, of course, that we will have the possibility to use both online and offline communications. Try, therefore, to exploit both. We know that they're both very effective. Diversify your online and offline communication, and as I said before, of course, exploit external channel. And I'm now giving the floor back to Angelique, who is actually going to give us more detailed insights on online communication. Thank you.
So thank you again, Elizabeth, for the short introduction on how we could execute the plan itself. So I'm just going to give you a more practical approach on how you could communicate or give an impression, in short, online. So as Elizabeth said, there are many channels that you could exploit, both within your project, so within the consortium, and also within the institutions that you belong to, and as well the external channels. Now, the first thing you need to concentrate, which gives a lasting impression, is work on your project website by identifying the target audiences and also identifying their needs. You'll be able to set your to have an idea on how you want your project website to look like, to identify the pages that you want to have, and also to identify the content that you want to put in these pages. So the project website, which is your main gateway for people to know more about their project, will let these people understand what your research is and also the results that you have. So by building your way through it, you'll be able to specify the content that people would want to read in your website, and by doing so, you need to always remember that these contents, as Elizabeth had pointed out, have to be clear and concise. You don't have to downsize the content of your research, but you need to make it clear for even your grandmother to understand. Also, by building this website, you need to keep it user-friendly and dynamic. So you need to retain the attention of your users, and you need to not let them be very confused. And by that, you'll actually gain users rather than lose them in the process. Also, a tip that we highly recommend is that you have your project website's domain open at least for a year, one more year after the project ends. Doing so will allow people, journalists, investors, or whoever, try to access your website and see the results themselves and get back to you, and then be able to nurture a longer relationship with your research in the long run. Also, because of that, you need to make your results easily accessible. So you need to make it a point that your scientific publications or your blogs or your videos that talk about your results be easily found by the users themselves. Another platform, of course, that is highly used nowadays by people is social media. So with social media, this helps boost your visibility. And these are just some of the tips that we could give you to get you started. So just like the CDE plan, you need to have a strategy for your social media activities. So as Elizabeth said, you just have to follow the simple process where you identify who your target audience is, what type of content you want to have for these social media channels, be fully aware of the advantages, disadvantages, and the limits that these channels have, because they're completely different, whether it's about Twitter, LinkedIn, even TikTok, or Instagram. All these have their ups and downs, and you have to be fully aware of them before you execute the plan itself. Also, you need to develop the key messages, which Elizabeth has told us. So by doing so, we'll be able to craft simple um, messages, especially for Twitter, since it has its character limit. This could be helpful for you to craft some key messages with specific hashtags that could gain the more users to or attract more users to look at your social media posts and thus your social media account. So by doing so, you need to also keep your community engaged in the process. So you just don't continually post social media entries every other day and so forth if once you build your calendar, but also you need to keep in touch with them by regularly interacting with them through comments or by sending messages. Lastly, of course, what could help you to retain or to boost to retain users and also widen your audience is to tag and mention relevant stakeholders. They could be someone that are somehow familiar with your work or someone that could that could benefit from your work. So you need to just tag and build your relationship with these stakeholders. And it's an added bonus actually if they're highly active in social media and very influential. In this way, more users will be able to know more about your research and then thus widen your audience online. Now, of course, these are just the channels that I've just online channels that are highly be used nowadays. But of course, you need to put content into them, and we need to talk about the media formats. So there's so many formats you could choose from to insert all these posts that you want to do for your website and also for your social media platforms. These could be articles, news and press releases, video interviews, video news releases, podcasts, webinars. There's so many. But of course, given the limited amount of time, we'll just focus some of them. So first of all, before I talk to you about the practicalities of media formats, I'd like to ask you if you have ever done any form of communication activity online for your research. So I'm seeing that most of you actually do a bit here and there. So that's interesting because this key or the secret that no one tells you in communicating online is that you need to be consistent. So it's like a routine that you need to follow. Even nowadays with COVID, it's kind of hard for us to even get up and do our morning routine to keep us sane. But also like that, social media has to be kept healthy by doing a routine. So you need a tip that we could give you is that you need to create an editorial calendar for all these social media platforms, craft your messages beforehand, and also identify which formats you want to include in this post so that you stay sane when keeping up with your online communication activities. So I'll just close the poll. And as you can see here, as I said, a lot of you said that you just do a bit here and there on on communication activity online. Now that we go back to, yes, yes. So the next question, of course, we want to ask is, do you think it's useful to communicate about your research online? So as you can see, especially now with COVID, communicating research online is more important nowadays compared to in the past, even though the internet has been very influential nowadays for everyone. So it's great to see that, of course, many of you said that it's very important. I'll just close the poll and show you the results. And Now I'll go back to the presentation. The next question we'd like to ask is who you want to communicate your research via your online channels. So as Elizabeth has said, there are many stakeholders you could choose from, and by identifying your target audiences, you'll be able to craft very easily everything else in your plan. So that could be a policymaker, the public, fellow scientists or investors or other people you are interested to talk to. So this is interesting because I see that many of you, well, all of you want to communicate your science to the general public. And then secondly, of course, I see that most of you want to communicate it to fellow scientists, which is nice because if you want to further strengthen the collaboration to the next step once the project's over, it's great to communicate with other scientists. And then I see that there are also other people who want to communicate with policymakers and investors. And of course, with PhET research, given that it's low to medium TRL level, it's best that you try to start practicing not only to reach out to the general public, but also to the people who could fund your research, and that could be investors and policymakers. So I'll just close the poll and share with you the responses that we've gathered. Now, let me go back to the presentation. So let's go to the practical side of things. So one of the most common media formats that people like to look at are articles and news. They're actually the easiest type of format for people to produce. Articles are often written by journalists, so they need to get a wider sense of things and not only talk about your research, but also the ongoing developments on your field or on your research team. So they try to extract information not only from you guys, but also from other people, and they try to write it in a journalistic approach, or let's say a very unbiased approach, and try to capture an angle that many readers, even the general public, would like to read on. And they do this by writing it with a language that's recognized by everyone. While on the other hand, press and news releases are actually something you can do. These are used to promote the project's activity and also to let people be more aware of your consortium. And this could be written in a more institutional language, something more formal, less colloquial. And of course, the content is easily approved in the process, so it's easier to get things done with press and news releases, while articles have to be written in a certain time frame, since journalists need to fact check the things before publishing the article itself. Now, as I said, it's easy to produce these articles and news, and it's easy for people to read them online. And in the process, you get a wide exposure by letting people share more about the articles. But as I said, internet can be a tricky place because with so much information, with so much articles and news being produced every day, it's hard also to stand out. So you might get lost in all your pieces, or some of your pieces can get lost in the crowd if it's not written in a way that could catch people's attention. And of course, they're at times hard for you to convey your complex information in short prose, since articles and news are often written not in a novel length, but in a short as a short essay, for example. And if you're unlucky, for example, someone writes something bad about your research, it could um, retain in people's minds, and so they think badly of research. So in the process, if bad news is being shared, this could also diminish the reputation of your research. Now, PhET, of course, doesn't mean that by communicating PhET through articles and news, you don't only talk about your research, you also talk about other things. You talk about the challenges, the innovation, the impact of your research, the legacy, and the people behind it. This is actually what we do with PhET. So if you visit our platform, you'll see all these information that you see before you in our presentation, where we talk about researchers, the impact of their research and the legacy that they have, and also the influence of their research in relevant themes, like for example, COVID. Now, these are just the general tips I could provide you for in preparation for the journalistic articles when a journalist approaches you, or when you want to write the news, or want someone in your consortium to write the news. You need to always remember that you need to make journalists understand your science, and same goes for news writing, where you need to use less technical jargon. Also, it's best when you write your news to use a fresh and easy to understand writing style. In this way, it's easier for people to read or to decide to click on your news and read more about it. As well, you need to use a catchy title. So if you feel like this is very overwhelming, it's nice to ask for help. So you could ask for help from your communications or press office, or from anyone that you know in your circle who has experience with communication, or you could also approach us if you also need help communicating your research. Now let's move on to a more popular format, which everyone's using right now, which is video. So in the past, video has always been broadcasted through the TV, but then because of the internet, later on, we get to see an explosion of people using video as media format to talk about anything, including their research. So as you can see here, by 2022, they predict that the online videos will make up more than 82% of all consumer internet traffic. And that's 15 times higher than it was in 2017, which is just 3 years before now. So just think about how much information, how many videos are being produced in the process throughout the months. And because of that, we need to be fully aware of what kind of videos we want to produce for our PhET research. In our case, with PhET, we have been producing a series of journalistic science videos. This could be about the research itself or about the person behind the research. Whenever we try to produce these videos, we always remember three things. First, we need to make sure that the language must be clear, journalistic, and less institutional, because at the end of the day, we want a lot of people, almost everyone that's going online, to watch our video and to be able to understand what we want to convey, who they're watching, and what they do. Also, by producing these science videos, we need to make sure that the sources go beyond the consortium. As I said, journalists want to have a better to give the audience a wider or broader idea of what's happening, not just about your research. And lastly, of course, since it's a video, it has images. But with these images, you need to make sure that they describe carefully the content or the topic you want to talk about. So for example, in one of these videos, it talks about levitation. And they need to make sure, well, the journalist needed to make sure that the online user is able to understand how this concept of levitation works. And so he shot the video footage where the scientist tries to move this particle in air and let people understand what this means for that project itself. Now, of course, you could also try to produce your own videos and not rely on the journalists. By producing your own videos, there are actually different, let's say, details that you need to account for. So this could be, you could produce your web videos, which talks about at the beginning a short introduction about your project and also the objectives you want to meet, and as well showcase the results that you have for your project by the end by producing an end of project video. And then, of course, you could do a series of video interviews. You could ask your researchers or the coordinator to talk more about your project and to let your online users know more about the people behind the research rather than the research itself. So it's less technical and more holistic As you can see on the right, these are just some of the many videos that we received during the Future Tech Week, where we asked the projects who participated for the Future Tech Week to submit short videos about their research and also about themselves. And so it would be great if you're interested to check out the link as I provided. And of course, for both cases, we highly recommend that when you shoot your videos, it has to be kept short since people also have a short attention span in the internet. So 1 minute 30 seconds is on average is the best time duration. Of course, if you have a very long video or a substantially long video that you put up in YouTube because it's hard to cut it out, you still need to prepare a shorter version for social media in case you want to also promote people to check out the original YouTube video that you've uploaded. And as well, to gain a wider audience, it's highly recommended to write a press release about the video so there will be more people who can read more about the insights or the in-depth reasoning on why you produced this video, and then check out the video itself. Now, for practicalities, these are just the tips that we could give you when you make your own video. You need to first define your storyboard. So you need to understand identify the questions that matter and that you want to address when you produce this video, and then identify who the key people are in case you do the interviews. While you do these footages, of course, you need to make sure that you record them with a stable hand. And because if you keep on shaking your video, it would also discourage people to watch your video as it seems unprofessional for them. And so if you cannot help but shake your hand, it's best that you use a tripod. Now, also, sound is important, not just the footage itself. So you need to pay attention whether you are picking up noise while recording your scenes or your interviews. You need to make sure that you could isolate the interviewee's voice if you have someone speaking in your video. But if not, you have to make sure that there's the sounds from your machines have to be lower down in case it's too evident. Of course, by recording all these types of footages, you need to mix and match them to give fluidity to your video. And then, like news and articles, you need to kill your darling. So whether or not you record too many footages, it's fine as long as you make sure that you know which footages to use and which other footages to cut. So you cannot put all the footages that you've recorded in your video. Now, another interesting format that people are looking at nowadays is roundtable discussions. This could be done in the form of webinars or podcasts. Of course, there's so many tools you could explore to exploit this type of format, but today we're not going to discuss about it. What we need to what we wanted to remind you are the following: that as enticing as roundtable discussions are, you need to make also an effort in producing them because you need to have more substance compared to the news and articles and the audiovisual formats or videos that I mentioned earlier. You also need to make sure to keep your audience interested. So you, being the speaker or the host of a podcast or a webinar, you have to make sure that your speakers are also enticing or interesting for the audience themselves. And in the process, while you're asking questions to these invited speakers, you need to do your research beforehand. So you need to make sure you ask the right questions to keep on making your conversation very engaged. And as well, which something that's applicable to podcasts, you need to be consistent. So you need to make it a regular, you need to decide from the moment that you want to open up a podcast to post regularly, to make sure to not lose your audience in the process. Of course, as you can see, we've made roundtable discussions in the Future Tech Week this year. And here you could check out the few examples that we've had on roundtable discussions. Now, of course, communication formats that you've seen are great to provide content for your communication channels. But communication itself does not end there. As I told you earlier, communication goes along with dissemination. And by disseminating your content, you need to distribute them. This could be through multipliers or platforms that act like notice boards for your news feeds, portals, or newspapers when you reach out to the editors or the TV or the radio. So by doing this, you could reach a broader target audience, which is beyond your circle, and as well be able to entice or attract the attention of the media to pay attention to your research and then to broadcast it to a wide audience as well. So as you can see, you need to think like a newspaper boy. You need to make sure that when you communicate, you don't communicate only within your network, within your project channels, but go beyond that, as we mentioned earlier. So the external channels that you could use are the news portals, the scientific magazines, online communities on the internet, journalists, and also us, PFET, where we could help you spread the word. And of course, another thing that you need to remember is that the EU institutions have also a large online presence. So by reaching out to them in Twitter, such as providing the news item to your project officer or tagging or mentioning them in social media and using their hashtag, you'll be able to get the audience, a larger range of audience through their help. And so, of course, social media, even though it's just about communicating about your research, it could do more than that. It could also disseminate and broaden your audience. In a way, it's also an opportunity for us to do virtual networking. So these are just the 3 tips I could give you when you jumpstart your social media to a larger scale, where first you need to leave your comfort zone. So while you put up regular posts in social media, you need to make sure to find new people outside your network. Contact them personally and tell them more about yourself, more about your research, and why you want to share this with them. In the process, you could build up new relationships and then find other people who you unexpectedly bump into that could help your work. Also, another tip I could give you is that you need to ask for help. So you need to contact your communications and press office or groups like us to promote your content and your research. In that way, even though you have a limited time and you have limited skills or limited budget, as long as you know internally that there are other people that you could approach to widen your audience, they're there to help. Of course, lastly, something not many projects do is that they have this option to team up. So pet projects, when they work together, could amplify their online presence. So if you're a research PHET project with which knows other fellow PHET projects that are in line with your work, you could try to collaborate and then build a larger online presence. And so again, I'll leave the floor to Elizabeth to talk more about stakeholders engagement.
Yes, thank you, Angelique. Actually, I'm just giving you a short overview about the offline communication channels and possibilities that we have. Angelique has provided you with a really broad overview about online communication, but of course, we are also aware of the fact that we need actually to exchange physically also with our stakeholders. This is, of course, very important for us, I would say, as humans, that we really need social relations. And now, of course, it's really hard times to have or to organize and be present in physical events where we can really establish a strong relationship with our targets, with our stakeholders, and of course increase trust and reputation towards, of course, our research. And us, of course, as experts in this case. But of course, we do not have to give up. And of course, the offline communications, as we all know, of course, are really triggering the dialogue with stakeholders. When you get to know in person, again, a person or a stakeholder, of course, it's even more impactful. And of course, the offline communications. So we refer mainly to events or any possibility where you have the real chance to get in touch and know personally people are actually aimed at really informing, again, about our research. So whenever we are at an event, we are of course presenting our research. We have the possibility, of course, through offline communications to consult our stakeholders, to receive their feedback, or to collect recommendations for the further implementation of our research. And above all, of course, we have the possibility to establish a dialogue, a real dialogue, and engage them, involve them, and make sure that this acceptance is being actually put forward as a basic requirement for, as we said, the uptake of our research results. I would not, of course, downsize the power, of course, of new online communication channels that we're using. We're obliged to use in these times. So, of course, we have plenty of other formats that can happen online, and that will enable us to set up a dialogue with our stakeholders. I'm referring, of course, to webinar, to these online trainings as we had in this case, and of course to roundtables that can all happen online, of course. But of course, let's go into the possibilities we have to engage in person with our stakeholders. Next slide, Angelique, thank you. Yes, and we have, of course, different formats, as you may already know, of course, the conferences and fairs that are organized externally or organized also from ourselves within our projects, or as a university, for example, the workshops, which is, of course, a very engaging format, especially participation workshops, where you also co-create with your stakeholders, your reference targets, of course, your some specific parts of your research, matchmaking and pitching events, where you have the possibility again to pitch about your research, about the results of your research. Especially interesting, of course, for investors in this case, the webinars, as we've mentioned, which are online and are providing a similar opportunity as the physical events. And of course, also join. We recommend you also to join whenever it is possible for you to join public engagement initiatives, so addressing the broader public, such as the European Researchers' Night, just to give you an example. Other formats are absolutely fine-tuned with any networking opportunities, for example, with associations representing the target that you have selected for your strategy. So try to network with them, try to engage with them, and enter, for example, into their own events in order to present your research. Actually, this is a picture of an event that we organized with Artifacts at the European Parliament, where we had the possibility, again, to set up a dialogue with policymakers, as well as with the other stakeholders representing researchers and industries as well, working in disruptive technologies, and of course to let them know about the importance of, for example, the PREFET program, now the EIC Funder program, in order to get funding from them. So again, this dialogue is fundamental also for the sustainability of our research activities. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, these are just a couple of tips in order that you may implement, of course, to organize your event, which are also applicable, of course, in these times if you're organizing an event online, for example, a final conference of a project, or again, a webinar. So actually, you should consider 3 main steps. Or phases, so before the event, during the event, and after the event. So before the event, make sure that you state clearly the scope and what the participants are going to gain if are going to participate in our event. Promote your event on social media and on any other channel you have the possibility to exploit, and we've seen this, of course, through the broad presentation made by Angelique. We also suggest you also to write a pre-event press release in order to catch up the attention also, for example, of the media who could actually join your event. During the event, of course, always make sure that you have to think of the audience you are addressing, that is in front of you, and of course try to use the language they're used to, and of course insist on the contents that they are more interested in order to raise again the involvement, engagement, and acceptance around your research. And of course, you have also the possibility during these events to collect feedback. That is another important point for your monitoring activities as well. And after the event, of course, we suggest you to write also a post-event press release. Absolutely share the outcomes. So the press release could also contain these outcomes, or you may think of having a specific short policy brief, for example, if you are addressing the policymakers with the main outcomes of your event. So the idea is always to keep the discussion alive and to keep the engagement with the stakeholders alive, even beyond, of course, the event. Next slide. Okay, so we have the fifth question of the day. So have you ever organized an event? I'm referring, of course, to offline, but now it can be also adapted to the online channels, or any engagement activity as part of your research or project, sorry, you're involved in. Okay, we're still waiting for the numbers. Okay, so we encourage you to give you the answer. We are closing, yes, this question. Yes, here we go. Now we have the first numbers. So majority, 90% almost, seems you have already had experience in organizing events, so that's perfect. So sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so here are the results. So almost 90% have organized an event online or offline, so a really engagement activity. Okay, and 11% no, but of course we may come back to this later. And okay, great. So thanks, Angelique. Yes, and we are approaching to the end of our presentation. And by the way, I also encourage you to use the possibility to send us questions in the dedicated box if you need to interact with us. And yes, I'm just approaching the last point of our presentation, which is actually the measurement of the effectiveness of our strategy. We have already underlined from the very beginning the importance of continuously monitoring the performances of our communication and dissemination strategies. This will allow us, of course, to have an idea of the overall project communications performances. Sometimes we have also some duties in front of a commission, for example, which is financing our research, to report about this. So this is actually beyond, of course, the reporting requirement. We have to think of the monitoring process as a necessary and fundamental step of our strategy, because by monitoring yes, our communication activities, the outreach, the engagement we can also see whether we are performing well or not, whether we need to put in place some corrective actions, whether we can really have an idea of the impacts, of the social impacts as well, in terms, again, of awareness, of engagement, of people and of stakeholders with our research and the contents that we are sharing with them. So impacts can be shared by indicators. The indicators have been grouped into 3 main groups, or I would say 2 main groups plus the qualitative assessment, which is actually very much in line with the community engagement monitoring. So we have the outreach monitoring, community engagement monitoring, and the qualitative assessment, which is part actually of the level of engagement from a more qualitative point of view. Next slide, thank you. Yes, so in terms of outreach monitoring tools, what we can use in order to measure the outreach of our communication activities. So quantitative indicators. So by outreach, we really wanted to measure the number of people we are reaching out with our contents, or for example, when we organize an event through our event. So online, we can use, of course, any analytics which are provided by Google, for example, social media analytics. Especially this can be used for those channels that you are directly managing. Maybe you can also collect data also provided by external channels. There are some multipliers which are providing you the number of hits, for example, of therefore to give you an idea of the real outreach you have achieved also on other external channels. Of course, there are also more sophisticated software tools that you can use in order to have a more precise overview of the outreach indicators. And so these indicators, as I said, are quantitative indicators. They give you an idea of the impacts you have received in terms of awareness. So real number of people and audiences that have come across with your content. Next slide, please. So the community engagement monitoring tools and analysis. So the community engagement online indicators, again, you can use social media analytics as well as more sophisticated tools which are giving you, for example, an analysis of a sentiment of people engaged, for example, on social media, analyzing, of course, the level of the content, of the level of the comments they have shared on social media. But of course, other indicators are represented, for example, by the number of people involved in an engagement campaign. You can calculate the engagement campaigns both from their outreach point of view as well as from engagement. So the number of people which have answered to your call to action is actually really another indicator that is actually giving you the level of interest towards your research and your call to action. So the impact is actually really to have indicators measuring the interaction between the project contents and the viewers online from a quantitative perspective in this way, because of course we are calculating really on numbers, the number of people which are commenting, which are mentioning, for example, your research on social media and so on. We also have another level which is also analyzing, of course, the level of impact and impact in terms of engagement and acceptance, which is even more detailed and goes even more in depth of the real interest and engagement of stakeholders, which is, of course, the qualitative assessment on specific activities, I would say. This is possible, of course, when you organize a dialogue with your stakeholders, and especially when you organize events, workshops, webinars, so where there's the possibility to directly interact with the participants through, for example, of course, sharing ideas verbally, but of course also in collecting feedback forms, in organizing short interviews, face-to-face feedbacks, and so on. And of course, again, the analysis from a qualitative point of view is analyzing or measuring the engagement between the project and the external community through direct interaction, and of course receiving a more impactful analysis in terms of qualitative contents and qualitative reactions from the stakeholders you are engaging with. So the next slide is actually a final question. So do you monitor the effectiveness of your communication activities? Are you using some systems, some indicators to measure your online communication as well as, of course, your offline activities? So again, this is very important because you may remember a very famous statement that you cannot manage what you can't measure. This is partially applicable also to the communication and dissemination strategy, but it is absolutely true. If you do not measure, you really have some difficulties in effectively implementing a strategy. So I'm seeing from the poll that we are on 50-50% answer on yes and no. So I think that in few seconds. We're closing the poll. Okay. Okay, so 50-50, so interesting to know this. So, but I'm really happy that, of course, there's a good majority of people that are already using these instruments. Of course, we may, I would say, organize an entire webinar or training around how the monitoring and, of course, the indicators that can be used. And, of course, we would be very pleased, of course, to organize one in the future, because, of course, we have also set up a methodology that can be easily implemented in European projects, as well as, of course, in your research campaigns. Yes, okay. So we have come to the end of our presentation.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any questions.
So far there are no questions, but at the same time we don't have so much time. I think we could just give them the homework, because this takes time, as far as I know.
So I leave you with Laura, Angelique. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So thank you again, Elizabeth, for the discussion on engagement and how we could monitor our communication dissemination activities. So it's time for our homework, because actually we don't have so much time. It would be great to get more questions from you now, rather than give you the homework, to give you a thing to do now, which is we want you to think of 3 key messages that you could address to your stakeholders once you identify them. And this could also be to the general public. When you have these key messages, we want you to translate them into 3 key statements, which you could use to write your short news. So this, whichever project, whether you're at the beginning or at the middle or at the end of your phase, it's best that you could do this exercise. So you could also try to get used to the idea of writing the news yourself. And then of course, we're happy to give you a feedback. So once you send in your homework to us, we'll provide later our emails. We could get back to you shortly, of course, with our feedback, and give you the possibility to also publish your short piece of news on your pet research at our website. And this could be also distributed through our e-magazine. So of course, if you have also any problems, you could ask us while you're in the process of doing this. Now, I think the last question that we want to ask from you is that for our next webinar session, we want you to choose which kind of theme you want to work. You want us to look at the next time around. Do you want us to write a news release? Do you want us to talk about social media, or to talk about events, videos, how to measure your communication effectiveness? So we're seeing that a lot of you want to know more about measuring your communication effectiveness. That's interesting, because as we saw in the poll previously, that only 50% of you actually monitor them, and it's also important to measure them in order to fine-tune your strategy, which you should build from the very beginning. So building a communication dissemination strategy is a process that you cannot let go. So from the beginning till the end, you always need to measure your communication effectiveness, no matter what, and be able to pinpoint the things that don't work, and the things that do work along the way. So I'll just close the poll, and so yeah, this is what we got. So yeah, we'll take into account, and we'll talk more about communication effectiveness next time around, and also other things like social media and organizing events. And I think that's somehow it. I don't know if any of you have questions. Because of course you could contact us via our emails if you want to do the homework, and also for any doubts you have on communication dissemination activities. So there's one, Aniko, I think. So she wants us to talk about pet briefing, which is of course another CSA project, and they focus more on the innovative part and intro to market part. But they also what they also do is that they also try to train you to communicate with the investors, which is also important for PHET projects. So it's not only about talking about the research to the general public, but also talking to people who could invest or put money on your research, and then to make your to help you jumpstart to the next phase where you could let people see about the tangible results of your project. If there are any other questions, of course, you could write us, but we have still 4 minutes to entertain other questions if you have interested.
Yes, just to complement what Angelique said about PHET Briefing, I know that PHET Briefing, which is one of our sister projects together with PREFET, is also organizing some workshops, training sessions this week, so in this academy. So we invite you, of course, to follow them. And as Angelique was saying, for sure, PHET Briefing is providing you the right tools in order to develop your exploitation strategy. And this includes also how to talk to the investors, how to pitch, and so on. So it's more focused exactly on the next level, which we have not analyzed today, which is actually the exploitation activities. So we also invite you, of course, to follow PHET Briefing and the website, and of course, any possibility they are giving you, because they are organizing beyond, of course, this academy, many training sessions, very interesting, free of charge. So we really invite you to look at their calendar of events, which is always very full of possibilities each month. I don't know if
they offer some training yesterday, and they will continue it somehow. But I mean, it's not only for those that were yesterday. It is like extra information from somebody else from the team tomorrow at 9. So it will be it will be great if you could complement all the information from all the trainings and make your own puzzle. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Angelique. We need to go now to the next session.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this intensive amount of experience. It is really, really great that you transfer it this way, and keep in touch for the future. I said it through the chat, but just to reinforce the message that the recording will be uploaded hopefully next week at the EU Academy platform. So it will be, all the contents will be there for all of us to keep thinking about these issues.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.